Good morning to everybody. Excuse us for this delay, but we needed to check the interpretation. This event has simultaneous interpretation to English, Spanish, and French. It is the annual strategic seminar organized by Transform Europe and the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Please, in order to use the interpretation, check on the bottom of your screens. There is this globe icon, and then click the language channel you wish to listen to. Never change this channel during the whole event. And in parallel, below the language channel you wish to select, please click the mute the original audio option. Because if you do not mute the original audio, then you will be listening to two languages at the same time. But the instructions will be given also here in the chat box if you didn't understand what to do exactly. The event has 3 sessions. The first one will last until 1 o'clock Central European Time, but we will have a break of 15 minutes because 3 hours is a lot, especially for an online event. Apart from the inputs of our speakers, we want to take questions from the audience and also have a short discussion if the time allows us. So welcome to the event, The Radical Left in a Pandemic World. The first session is called The Pandemic as an Accelerator of Capitalist Developments and the Consequences for the Project of European Integration. We have 7 speakers, and I will read them out according to the according to the way they're going to present their inputs. The first one is Walter Baier. He's a member of Transform Europe. The second speaker is Heinz Bierbaum. He's the president of the Party of the European Left, and he comes from Germany, from the party Die Linke. The third speaker is Catarina Martins. She's the coordinator of the left bloc, Bloco de Esquerda in Portugal. The fourth speaker is Juan Monedero. He's a professor of political science and also the director of Institute 25M in Spain. The fifth speaker is Mikkola. She comes from Finland. She's a vice president of the Party of the European Left, and the party she's affiliated with is Left Alliance. And the sixth speaker is Giώργος Katrougalos. He comes from Greece. He's a professor of public law and also an MP of SYRIZA in the Hellenic Parliament. He has also served as a Minister of Foreign Affairs in Greece. And the final speaker is Maria Karamesini. She's a professor of labor economics and social policy. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for accepting this invitation. As I have already informed the speakers, you have 30 minutes max, and please don't exceed this time so we can have also discussion and interaction with our audience. I give the floor now to Walter.
Thanks, Angelina. Good morning, everybody. I prefer to talk on structural issues. Of course, I'm concerned, as you all are, about the impact of the pandemic, even on our personal lives. The Corona crisis is mercilessly revealing the EU structural flaws, which is the wrong prioritizing of the European treaties, whose main concern is the unbridled functioning of the market and the wrong-headed division of competences between the EU institutions, which substitutes the principle of the democratic parliamentary formation of will at the national and European levels with a non-transparent interaction between governments and the EU bureaucracy. However, the international character of the crisis also reveals the ineffectiveness of the nationalist idea that societies could cope with the big challenges of the contemporary world by rivaling with each other for scarce resources. We as the left need to face the seriousness of the situation capitalism seems to come against its systemic limits. And this is why we need ideas how Europe's people could open a path to a new mode of production and culture. The last months have also reminded us that the balance of forces inside the national states is still decisive. However, they also demonstrated the tragic and the perils of the wanting European solidarity. And as a transnational European network, Transform, of course, has to cope with this aspect of the debate and its consequences for the perspective of European integration. The second lockdown, and this is the first chapter of my presentation, has dashed hopes for a quick recovery. The situation is exacerbated by an increase in geopolitical tensions, so that the starting economic upswing in China, which has apparently successfully overcome the pandemic, will not, or at least not fully, have a dynamizing effect on the global economy, unlike it had in the last crisis. Above all, however, in the view of digitalization and the environmental crisis, the capitalist economies are at the threshold of a comprehensive transformation that requires deep changes on both the national and the European level. In order to cope with the sanitary crisis, the governments last spring have passed special programs of hitherto unheard financial scope, which of course raised the debt levels in the Eurozone substantially. Because of the spread of interest rates, a rise in public debts affects the countries differently. It gives advantage to the financial powerful and discriminates against the weaker ones, thus aggravating the inequality between the industrialized regions in Southern and Eastern Europe and the economic power centers of the EU. This week, the European Council and the European Parliament agreed on a joint draft of the medium-term framework and the European recovery plan decided in the European Council in May. It seems that the main success that the European Parliament achieved in the negotiation is the linking of subsidies to the respect for the rule of law, which of course will meet the fierce resistance of the right-wing governments in Poland and in Hungary. However, no less important appears to me that the Council and the Parliament agreed on drawing up a roadmap for increasing the EU's own resources. The amount of around 1,800 billion euros appears impressive at first glance. The fact that 300 billion euros should be passed on as non-repayable funds, preferably to the countries that are most drastically affected by the pandemic, is certainly to be welcomed. However, the modalities of the payout are still unclear. Their linking to the European semester threatens that they will degenerate to instruments for the imposition of the well-known neoliberal reform recipes, and thus not reducing but increasing the social and the industrial inequalities. This leads to my second chapter. How will this affect European integration? True, for the very first time, a sort of Eurobond is introduced. That is good, but the decisive question, whether the new financial instrument is sufficient to absorb previous austerity's impact, and if it will be sufficient to cope with the recession, cannot be answered with yes. The 300 billion, which is about 0.7% over 3-year grant component, cannot really be regarded as a powerful fiscal stimulus. National debt and Eurobonds are seen, especially by the Social Democrats, as the universal means of combating the crisis, because according to Keynesian theory, otherwise inevitable distributional conflicts can be avoided. Certainly, the substantial rise in national debt is socially preferable to the rise in unemployment, and Eurobonds could make it easier for the countries hardest hit by the crisis to access credit. Yet the general problem of the state's high debt levels and their negative effect on the distribution of material and political resources among the states and classes will persist unless a radical haircut of the European debt and a change in the distribution of resources and income will be achieved. On the top of this, the economic reconstruction after the end of the acute phase of the pandemic must be linked with the ecological transformation of the industrial and energetic basis of the economies and will demand unprecedented investing. The financing of this and the piled private and public debt will therefore become the economic key problem of the post-corona period. Political conflict along class lines will be inevitable, which is why the crisis is sharply posing the question of hegemony regarding the social interest that should prevalent in dealing with it. Politically speaking, the challenge lies not only in reaching a consensus regarding general goals such as ecological sustainability, this already exists in broad layers of the societies, but on the instrument and institutions needed to implement them, which are the states, new forms of public property, the socialization of the financial sector, capital controls, economic democracy, and the strengthening of wage dependent at the level of enterprises, municipalities, countries, and the EU. Fourth, the pandemic demonstrates clearly that military is not the answer to the ecological and social problems. The obvious demand which the left must put forward is that the funds planned in the EU budget for an increase in the military expenditure will be redirected towards an expansion of public services. Protection from military aggression is first of all a political task consisting in the strengthening of international law and cooperative structures. In September, Josep Borrell admitted that the failure of the EU neighborhood policy in saying the European Union's neighborhood is engulfed in flames. In other words, this policy has failed. True, Europe cannot disconnect from the growing geopolitical and global economic tensions. But it would help much if it refrained from interfering in the domestic struggles of adjacent countries like the Ukraine or Belarus. To be very clear about this, the people of Belarus have the full sympathy of the left in the strive to get rid of the despotic regime of Lukashenko. But we oppose the imperialist arrogance to decide from outside in which ways and with which goals these ends could be achieved. The EU's problem of positioning itself in the changed international environment is too complex that it can simply be answered by the abolition of the principle of unanimity in the decision-making of the foreign policy issues in the European Council, which is called by the main powers of the EU. For example, the nuclear weapon ban treaty coming into force in January 2021. Despite the refusal of the nuclear powers and NATO, some of the neutral and non-aligned member states of the EU signed and already ratified the treaty, demonstrating thus that unanimity does not exist with regard to nuclear armament. Amongst other things, this proves the necessity of a broad public debate of the directions and goals of a possible joint security policy. Fifth, crises are times of executive, they say. This creates a special contradiction in the EU system. On the one hand, the heads of governments occupy the public attentions. On the other hand, the superegos meeting in the council want to present themselves as potent leaders, especially to the national audiences. Divided in opposing groups, the Visegrad states, the frugal 4 or 5, and the Mediterranean countries, the council cannot deliver, while steering the EU of the 27 through the Franco-German integration engine increasingly turns out as a relic from the founding period of the EU and the Cold War. Interestingly, during the paralysis of the Council, the European Parliament, by a large majority, passed a resolution calling for a substantial increase of the EU budget and the financing through the creation of an independent financing base, whereby a common consolidated corporate tax base, digital services, taxation, a financial transaction tax, and others were named. Yet the parliament has no legitimate right to initiative, so its statements do not have the weight that they would or should have as the expression by a directly elected representative body. Moreover, due to the balance of forces in the parliament, the initiative turns out weak and half-hearted. However, it demonstrated that the struggle between political parties expressing different and antagonistic social interests evolves in different patterns than the nationalist power play among the leaders of states. What we need now is the strengthening of the social infrastructures and the public and health service, an unconditional basic income to protect the most vulnerable layers of the societies, the reconstruction and ecological transformation of Europe's industries, a human right-orientated refugee policy, the elimination of regional disparities, the building of effective energy and transportation nets, which altogether will require a capacity reaching beyond the scope of the current EU budget. This leads to the question of political leadership. Europe's left needs to be more active on the European political scene as a power that stakes claim to leadership. A claim to leadership requires democracy. Democracy means self-determination and the right of the populations to control their states. This requires clear competence divisions between the European and the national levels in decision-taking. We still live in societies in which antagonistic interests rival one another, which is why we clearly defend the right of every progressive government to disobey those rules which hamper the well-being of their states and societies. And we also defend the right of every country to leave the Eurozone. However, realistically seen, a disorderly breakup of the EU, at least under conditions of peace, is rather improbable, and it would not benefit the left. The political core of the long process of refoundation of Europe based on a post-capitalist vision is a sovereign, freely and elected parliament interacting with the trade unions and the social and ecological movement. If the European Parliament was to become the center of the decision-making in those affairs for which the EU has authority, the key factor would be the intervention of the political parties at the European institutional level. I will tirelessly repeat in this context, let us not forget that from the English Chartists to Lassalle to the implementation of women's suffrage in Central Europe, the rise of the left was always the struggle to relocate the political decision-making power of the monarchs and their executive to the parliaments elected on the basis of a universal and equal suffrage. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Walter. Okay, I give now the floor to Heinz.
Thank you very much, Angelina.
Heinz, your mic is off.
No.
No, we hear Heinz.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So once again, thank you very much, Angelina. Good morning to everybody. There is no doubt that the pandemic has really a strong impact on our working and living conditions. But we are not only confronted with the emergencies caused by the pandemic. We are facing far-reaching structural changes caused in particular by the ecological challenges like the climate change. The consequences are profound upheavals in the society, economically, socially, and politically. There's an urgent need for a drastic reduction in CO2 emissions. Production based on fossil fuels no longer has a future. The way we produce will change profoundly, not only because of the ecological challenges, but also because of the digitalization. Now, actually, we are confronted with a second Europe-wide wave of the pandemic, with the consequence of severe security measures to contain the pandemic, which causes dramatic economic and social consequences. For the euro area, the European Central Bank forecast a decline in GDP of more than 10% in this year. Unemployment will increase, and the already big social problems will increase even further. The Party of the European Left, as you certainly all know, created and is promoting a platform how to get out of the crisis in a social way and how to tackle the new challenges. We identified 5 axes of comprehensive activities: protection of the population, economic recovery and social ecological transformation, democracy, disarmament and peace, European and international solidarity. I don't want to present the entire platform and the different axes. I rather want to concentrate on the question of social ecological transformation, or the so-called Green New Deal. The Party of the European Left is currently in a process of rethinking its strategy. In this context, social ecological transformation plays a central role. Everybody is talking now about the necessity of a Green New Deal, but there are really very different positions and different political approaches. The European Commission, for example, is campaigning for a European Green Deal, and the objective is to have the European Union climate neutral in 2050. Main elements are investments in environmentally friendly technologies, the decarbonizing of the energy sector, energy efficiency for buildings, cleaner and healthier private and public transport. The question, however, is whether the European Green Deal, as proposed by the European Commission, remains in the neoliberal dogma, which is unfortunately to be feared. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that some elements of the austerity policy, like the Stability and Growth Pact, are suspended in order to combat the corona crisis. Also, Walter, in his speech, referred to this. But this Stability and Growth Pact is only suspended and not abolished as we want it to be. It's obvious that the Commission and the majority of the European governments want to return to the previous policy. In this context, I want also refer to the recovery fund called Next Generation. And despite all the deficits, and there are a lot of deficits, the construction of this fund is a remarkable change in the European financial policy. And it could be also a step in the direction of a Green New Deal, under the condition, however, that the funds are used for social and ecological purposes. We are strictly against the connection to the European semester, and the return to the austerity measures must be prevented. We will see what's going to happen. Another European and more ambitious proposal was launched by the campaign Green Deal for Europe, initiated by DiEM25. The proposal focuses on public investments in the future, on improving public services, on empowering citizens and their communities, on guaranteeing decent jobs and rising standards of living, and DiEM25 demands to end the dogma of endless growth. Our parliamentary group in the European Parliament, the GUI-NGL, which has now a new logo, the left, and the parliamentary group is promoting a proposal with the title Towards a Green and Social New Deal for Europe, based on 10 pillars, respecting the 1.5-degree warming limit, guaranteeing rights for the people and contribute to sustainable development, mainstreaming just transition, prioritizing nature, launching a massive public investment drive, tax justice, fully implement of an energy transition, bringing forward an alternative to emissions trading, transforming agricultural policy, pushing for fair and just international trade. The proposal of the GUI-NGL of our parliamentary group is indeed a radical proposal for a final chance. It breaks with a neoliberal European policy and promotes an active policy with public investments. In this context, certainly a point of reference is the Labour Party Manifesto 2019. This program orients on a comprehensive Green New Deal, campaigning for a green industrial revolution in order to create 1 million jobs. They want an economy that serves the interests of the many, not the few. Not only investments for the ecological transformation of the industry are intended, but also the question of ownership is tackled. Public ownership plays in this concept a central role, guaranteeing a democratic control over nationally strategic infrastructure. The European left has to play a major role in the debate about the Green New Deal and to come up with an own position. The political document adopted in Malaga and the platform how to get out of the crisis in a social way can be taken as a starting point. We need to rethink the industrial production and its ownership and the entire energy and mobility model as well. Large public investments programs for job creation and ecology are necessary. The project of the left Green New Deal should become a cornerstone of our work in the coming month. A left-wing concept of a Green New Deal has to be a comprehensive concept oriented on welfare. We need public investments in infrastructure, social services like healthcare, social housing, education and culture. And to finance those necessary investments, a just tax policy taxing the rich and the wealth is required. A green transition of industry is obviously necessary, but we also need to protect the workers and employees affected by this process. For the left, the connection between ecological requirements and social needs is crucial. Just transition, promoted by the International Trade Union Confederation, is a concept to combine ecological transition with social protection. From a left-wing point of view, a new industrial policy with new energy and mobility concepts has to include the direct participation of the workers. This, in my opinion, is crucial. A left Green New Deal has to be combined with economic democracy. This is, in my opinion, an important difference to other concepts. Fundamental changes in that direction, however, will not come overnight. And they will not happen if not we, together with other forces, take responsibility. The European Forum, which is actually taking place, and this webinar is also part of the European Forum, is a good and useful platform for the debate between the left, progressive, and ecological forces. We need a strong cooperation between the political left, movements like Fridays for Future, and the trade unions. Even if there are still some contradictions, the trade unions are more and more aware of the necessity of the ecological transition of industry. The cooperation with the trade unions is crucial. Together with the trade unions, we have to fight for more and binding social rights in Europe. In the last years, in the last years, workers' rights and trade unions have been weakened by neoliberal labor market reforms. Examples are the change of the labor statute in France, Code du Travail, or in Italy with the so-called Jobs Act. Those reforms intend more flexibility, less protection against dismissals, and in particular, the priority of company agreements instead of collective agreements negotiated by the trade unions. Thus, collective bargaining power of the trade unions is weakened. But on the contrary, we need strong trade unions which have strong collective bargaining power. We need a pay rise and a reduction of working time in order to combat the consequences of the crisis and also to tackle the changes in the production process as well. Summarizing, I would like to say that a left Green New Deal has to be a comprehensive concept oriented on welfare. Ecological requirements and social needs have to be connected. Economic democracy and therefore the direct participation of the workers concerning the green transition of industry are crucial. For the left, it's clear that a sustainable ecological and social development can't be achieved within capitalist structures. The question of ownership is a big issue and has to be tackled. A fundamentally new model of development is necessary. Therefore, a transformatory approach towards a democratic socialist society is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heinz. I'm now giving the floor to Catarina Martins.
Hello, good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I will be speaking in English, and I don't have the intervention written, so if I'm not complying with the time, Angelina, please stop me. I would like to pose 3 questions for our debate, or I should say, I was reflecting on things that are being said and that the left has to have an answer. They are quite complicated these days. Walter and Heinz already spoke of one of them, is Europe. And the idea that maybe this time the European Union has a different answer to this crisis, a different answer from the financial crisis. This time they act earlier with more strength and more solidarity. And I believe it's not true. They both talk about it in different ways. I'll just say very fast what I was thinking about it. I think it's not the same. It's actually the same that we have already seen, because what Europe is telling us is that we will stop the treaties for, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, we'll see, and then everything will go back to business. And that is the first problem. The second problem is that actually Europe still doesn't have so many months, almost 1 year after the crisis, a really plan to support the economy and support the workers. So what we are seeing now is that unemployment is rising. And so we don't have a different answer for the future, and we don't have a different answer now. We have promises. We don't have anything is happening. We don't have any support right now for the millions of workers that don't have a job, or for the small business that cannot operate during the pandemic. So we really don't have nothing different. And finally, we don't have the cooperation that was being told that the European countries this time will have. And we see that not only because it takes so much time to make any decision, and we still don't have any decision to help economy and to tackle the social impact of the pandemic, but also because what we have seen so far was countries struggling to have the health equipment that they needed when the pandemic arrives. And we don't know what's going to happen with the vaccine. We don't know what's going to happen. We know that we are spending lots of public money in the pharmaceutical companies, but we don't know what's going to happen in the next day. I don't know. I believe that countries have different experiences, but here in Portugal, when the country could not buy tests in the international market because there were no tests, no coronavirus tests, it was the public universities that started to produce them. But now we are not seeing an investment in the public universities and in science as a public, something that is public and is for everyone. We are seeing that lots of money is being paid to patent vaccines and other treatments that have no guarantee that they will be available for all. So there wasn't really a change in how Europe is working. And if there is not a change, the result of this crisis will be what we know from the financial crisis, but worse, because this crisis is it's very, very fast. Economies are stopping, and lots of people are getting unemployed in very short periods of time. And we had another crisis 10 years. 10 years ago, we were still in crisis. So it's very difficult to balance countries and to tackle inequalities. So what I believe is going to happen is that unemployment and the lack of support to people that get unemployed and to businesses that have to shut down or at least stop part of their activities will have the same impact that have in financial crisis. That is transfer of income from workers to capital. That's what huge unemployment in Europe does. It was what has happened in the last crisis. It will happen again. And so when we get out of this crisis eventually, we will have low wages and we will have less worker rights because millions of unemployed was forced to accept worse working conditions than they had before the crisis. It is also a crisis that will rise public debt and not only public debt, but also private debt. Because if we don't have any new system to finance what the states are doing, and I don't see anyone talking about offshores or changing anything in Europe for that on that matter, what we really have is that what we are offering to most of small business and families is that they have debt. I mean, in Portugal, we have stopped, people are not complied to, if they have lost their job and their income, families that have low income because of the crisis, they do not have to pay their house rental or their mortgage to the bank for their house. But when the crisis stops, they will have to pay. So what we are saying to small business and to families is that they are going to have a huge debt to pay when the crisis is over. And we are also saying that to the countries, because if there are not new ways to finance the response to the crisis, countries will have more public debt. And one, we are not sure that there are going to be actually any solidarity in this new public debt. And so what we are seeing in this crisis is, again, a transfer of income from economy and productive economy to the financial system, for once. And with the combined factor of unemployment and low wages, depression to low wages, and more public debt and more debt in the economy, also a transfer of income from the south to the center of Europe, or if you want, from the peripheries of Europe to the center of Europe. So, as we know, apart from all announcements and all propaganda, this European answer is not different from the previous answer to the financial crisis. And if Troika was not good, maybe Europe will not use the term Troika right now. And maybe we are listening to all these speeches saying that workers are very important and the public services are very important. But in the end, the words have changed. The answer has not. And we can have a worse outcome than we had from the financial crisis. And I think this is the huge problem that we have to deal with. The second thing is that I'm always listening, people saying that now we really understood the importance of public services, of social welfare. I mean, public healthcare systems will be now in the center of politics and everyone will defend them. And they will get stronger when we pass this stage of the crisis, because now everyone understood that the liberal economies, the liberal countries that do not have public healthcare systems are worse than the European countries that have public healthcare systems. And I'm not that reassured, because what's going on right now is that public healthcare services, where they exist, like Portugal and in other countries, European countries mostly, they really are getting destroyed trying to answer this pandemic because they didn't have the means. They didn't have the means the years previous to the pandemic, so they don't have the ability to answer this tsunami that just entered their doors, and they are fragile. And in Portugal, and I believe in other countries, and I know there are differences. There are countries where there was a rupture of the systems, others they're not. Others are far from a rupture, others are close to that danger of rupture of the healthcare services. But everywhere, if you have a problem that is not COVID and you have the money, you will go to private healthcare service, because the public healthcare service is trying to answer COVID. And in Portugal, and I believe in other countries, we now have a lot of pressure to make public money paying for the private sector to give the population the healthcare they need, and that is not COVID. Thank you, Angelina. Because the private sector doesn't want to deal with COVID, it's too risky. But they want to have everything else, and they want the state to pay for it. So we can end up with the public healthcare services being very weak, so weak that the population is starting to ask for that public funding of private sector to go to the private sector and have other healthcare, other types of healthcare that are not COVID. And I believe that is very, very dangerous, because if we don't do anything, in a crisis that shown the power and the importance of public healthcare services can be the crisis that is killing healthcare services. Finally, the workers. We all hear some kind of romanticization of confinement. People then they stay at home, and how wonderful it is to stay at home, and you can bake your own bread, and you don't consume, and you don't pollute, and you have quality time with your children. And people that cannot be at home, well, they are our soldiers, they are our heroes, and they do everything. Well, this is simply not true. People that are at home are isolated. First, they are a minority that have qualifications that can work from home. And if they are really liking it, probably they don't have children, or they are not women. Because for women with children, or that have that care for children or parents or something, well, working from home, it's a nightmare, nothing else. And for all workers that are working at home, they are getting more isolated, and they work long hours, and then they don't have the power to organize themselves and to fight for their rights. And for the vast majority that has to work outside, they are not being seen as heroes, and they are not really getting paid as heroes to tackle this crisis. On the contrary, they have very low wages, and they will keep low wages, because as unemployment rises, it's not true that women, the migrants, everyone that makes care work, and it's so important in this crisis, will have its role recognized. That will not happen. What is happening is that people are getting low wages anyway, and they are having to work in very, very difficult circumstances. And so not only all workers are at stake, but we have a huge gap between workers that have to do with material conditions in what they are living these days. Because for people that have not lost their income, health comes first, and all confinement is required. For the other ones, the ones that have to work every day, the ones that have lost their income, their job, well, the virus is not a problem. The economic crisis is a problem. They don't care about the crisis. And so for the left, this is really a very difficult time, because divisions among workers are rising. And it's very difficult to establish a dialogue between everyone. And I think we need to reflect on this. And by saying this, I know, and I will finish, I don't want to say that everything it's terrible and we don't have past to work and to build on anything. I do believe that we have. And I do believe that we have all learned the power of science and the power of education and culture. And I think we need to work on it very, 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 very much. And we also can now explain some of the things that happen in financial crisis and organizing people around it. And I do believe that migrants, women, people that know that they are essential workers, although they do not have the wage they deserve, and their lives are very, very hard, they realize the power that they have. And that is very important, and we have to work on it as left. Thank you.
Thank you, Catarina. That was wonderful. Now I'm giving the floor to Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos is going to speak in Spanish. There is a problem. I'm not able to listen to him.
A sentence that I really like from Stanislav Lake says, "Let us not expect too much from the end of the world." There is something that I hate, which is melancholy, because I think melancholy is sad humor that paralyzes us. I want to share with you, I think, only one single idea. If we are in the right side of the story, if we're the ones who defend equality, fraternity, and freedom, why are we not governing everywhere? Or in other words, why do victims vote their murderers? Pandemics, unlike epidemics, are creators of radical change, pandemos, an infection that affects all population, and consequently we can hardly make a distinction between those who were affected or infected and those who were not, and that creates a new demos that implies a new subject. And I think my colleague was very right, because I think that new subject has a lot to do with the ecological subject, because we're all under risk because of the conversion of nature into a product or merchandise. The COVID pandemics is making the world upside down in a very visible manner. And the four tools that were used to leave the crisis of the year 1973, which were very eroded in 2008, are still very depleted nowadays. It's exporting the crisis to the southern countries. That's something other countries don't allow us. China, India, South-South cooperation. There are elements that prevent us from continuing the exploitation or the exportation of crisis to the south, then exporting the crisis to nature. Nature does not allow this anymore, and then exporting the crisis to future generations via debt. And this makes us see that the next crisis will have a lot to do with money and the credibility of money. And finally, exporting crisis in a very classical manner, i.e. increasing exploitation to workers, especially women. All of that promises a lot of protest. Let us be aware of, realize that the exploitation of these people makes people onto the street, and it forces certain politicians to promote transformation. First of all, southern countries, and very linked to that, migrants. And I do admit that we find it very difficult to mobilize migrants in our countries. Secondly, the environmentalism, which is Fridays for Future, right? It's a movement that really attracts young people. And then debt. And that process of debt that is creating an awareness among young people that they will not have social rights in the future. Of course, there's surveys in Spain that say most young people think, oh, we'll never have a pension in the future. And finally, the exploitation of workers in the productive world and then women in the reproductive world. No one can deny the capacity of the virus vis-a-vis contagion. We can see the figures there, and they will always there beyond what negationists say. And I think this threat is imaginary in part and then also real. And we need to know how the left will locate itself in a very strange context. And why is it strange? Because sensibility often forces us to go for security which is often more common in the right. A left that does not cannot meet on the streets and touch each other and create tensions by touching each other. So we have a problem in form and in content, and it is obvious that we need changes. It is not only about managing what exists, and it's not, as the left has done for over 50 years, it's not about just being defensive. And of course, this corresponds to us, and it is very difficult, I have to admit, telling people that there isn't a lost paradise that was lost, that was stolen to us many years ago and to which we have to return, that subjective desire to return to normality. It is a mermaid's chant that throws us into the cliffs. When we think about what to do in Europe, we need to harshly think about ourselves. Look in. We have a problem that the streets in Leipzig and Berlin lent us when they said this quote in German I have just mentioned. It is also a problem that expressed many people in many countries. In Brazil, they left the poverty thanks to the governments of the PP, but when there was the impeachment of Bieber and Lula was taken to prison, they did not go to the streets to defend them. In our country, we often, when we don't know how to defend Venezuela, we often feel powerless. And then there's a problem that there's a number of popular sectors that they can listen to the popularism of the extreme right. Beware, because I think that the solution in Europe has to do with the obligation of creating wide fronts. And we have a structural problem there, because from the three questions of the French Revolution, the most specific for the left is fraternity linked. This is true. I think that the question of fraternity is linked to the praxis, is linked to the method to walk towards equality. And as a method, it is always open, it's always flexible. Equality is the objective, and it also changes with society. We know that the freedom of the right is negative. The right to no interference of the public versus the private versus the freedom of the left is positive. It is the capacity to be purely free. The left has always wanted to change the economic basis of society. Later on, we gradually assumed that beside the class inequalities, there were other differences, gender, race, national, gender related. And these differences have not always coincided with the reivindications of the classes, and that led us to fragmentation. We are fragmented, but we still need to create those links that unite us, and the fall of the Soviet Union also broke us, and we were weakened, and the middle class's fragmentation also weakened the fight against capitalism. The conclusion is that we're living in very confusing times where everything has become merchandised. And there's a sentence by Woody Allen that I really love that says, God has died, history has died, Marx has died, and I feel really bad. Consumism has become an ideology, and neoliberalism is a way of life. It's a common sense where we live our lives as being businesses, as being business people of ourselves. And many popular sectors feel like middle classes. That is their aspiration. It's an aspirational middle class. It's a middle class that aims at living in that logics. It is not about being a worker or a poor person or marginalized or precarious to vote left. Victims can vote their murderers, but hey, this is not the total truth. When the left is able to identify the political adversary, when the left can add up the different social demands that are linked to emancipation, and when it offers a specific exit, a specific avenue, when it does a good management, the left can win. It is not that the neoliberal ideology is not under operation. It will always do so. But when we do these things, identifying the adversary, being able to add up the different social demands that are linked to the emancipation and offering a way out, and also doing good economic management, we can win. We can win. We had an example of this in Bolivia, 25 points. 25 points. The media was against us, the political sphere was against us, there were threats of civil war. Like in the 1990s, there were also threats to Nicaragua, and they won, nevertheless, thanks to these elements that were there. I'll repeat them. The right identification of the political adversary, know all the different social demands that are linked to emancipation, offering specific solutions, and then doing a good economic management. And we can see this from a different angle. In the United States, the Democratic Party has forgotten a part of its power, of its potential voters. And Donald Trump could have won due to this stupidity within the Democratic Party. As a conclusion, it's not only about governing well, and it is not enough to be a clearly left-wing party in our programs. We need to convince our social basis, a social basis that has different priorities to emancipation. And I cannot, go deeper into this, but I can share with you that the pending subject of the left is to construct parties in movement, because I think movement parties is the requisite to be able to create wide, ample fronts. Movement parties add up all the different souls in the left that are divorced, the reformist souls that want to virtuously manage what exists, the revolutionary front, which marks horizons from what exists, but beyond that, and then the rebellious front that invents new horizons. Those of us who are here in this forum, we're not fighting with each other. If we need to go to elections, we know that. Yes, we know we need the state as such, but we also know that it is probable that the institutional bureaucracy can eat us. And I'm living that to myself in Spain, and we've only had 1 year in government, but we can clearly identify how a good part of the resources that the party should devote to the movement part of the party, it does not exist because they're managing the party as such. And there's a background issue. We're operating often with a mechanicist way linked to the party method, which basically constantly re-edits the iron law of Mitchell's 1911. I always say that we need to be like Wikipedia and we cannot be like Twitter. We need to be like light, particle and wave, movement and particle. And as we move beyond and leave our territories and go to Europe, this becomes even more complicated. Europe reminds me of Star Wars, when with that parliament, intergalactic parliament, that one felt was out there. Catarina must be scared thinking about this. the management of intergalactic institutions should last 2 centuries. That way you would have a long time to prepare your speech. I think that one of the most relevant principles of the EU is the principle of subsidiarity. That which the inferior part can do should not be done by the supra part, but the inferior part should not, detach itself. And this can only be done by pressure, by doing pressure. But I think that in the EU, only governments can put pressure, and slightly the European Parliament, and that leads us to an obligation. And that's why I think this meeting is very important. We are obliged to support each other so that the different left strengths can gain in the different countries, can win in the different countries. I think we need to see each other more, meet more often when the conditions allow us to, because enthusiasm is also something that can be infected. And I think we need to read our failures better. And I think this is the main thing I wanted to convey to you. We need to inject lateral thinking into our parties. I think our interpretation of change is very rigid, it's very mechanical, very platonic. We're too modern. There is a reality and we interpret it as corrupt. There's an ideal world that exists only in our heads. And then there's a tool which allows us to break the real world and reach the ideal world. In that reading, if someone changes the plan, he's a dissident. If someone becomes a barrier, he's a traitor. And we have to be really careful because sometimes we conquer the state, but we don't leave bridges there. And it does not make me naive, because I know that the old regime still has a lot of power, and it's always conspiring to fail us. It's power, as Lenin told Kautsky in the famous book. There is a Vadou idea that I like. It says that we're living in an interval. In the same way, there was a revolutionary stage between 1979 and 1871, when the Commune of Paris fell. There is an interval there that opened where the social changes were defined, and it was inaugurated in 1917, and it finishes, and this can be debated, in 1973, maybe, with the Yom Kippur crisis and the start of what I think is neoliberal globalization and the coup to Allende, which I think is very symptomatic. Or, that interval also opens with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. And the reality is we're still in the interval and we haven't been able to raise our heads. I think this meeting is really well thought, because I think the pandemics has broken all these limits. We might, walk between the cracks, or we might fall within the shock. I've just published a book where I reflect on Antigona. So basically, if we've been able to not bury our dead, why wouldn't we be able to overcome the system? Because we have sacrificed the eternal laws of the gods, Antigona would say, when Teoten denies the burial of Polynesius, and she disobeys, because here we have not disobeyed, and we will not be able, wouldn't we be able to change these structures in our societies? We cannot abolish capitalism because their connections are infinite, but I think we can gradually disconnect parts of capitalism, or at least its logic, because I am really fed up seeing that after 14 years of left-wing governments in, say, Argentina, or in other popular governments in Argentina, in only 2 years, Macri's government dismantled everything else. We need to dismantle not only parts of capitalism, but also part of capitalism's logic, so that the neuronal architecture that we build becomes irreplaceable. You wouldn't be able to die even if it was shot. I think we have 4 tasks ahead, which are steps towards socialism. Creating public companies. I think this is an ideal moment to recover the need for public companies. We need to regulate capitalism. We need to also inject spaces of unmerchandised life in our societies. We also need to help the alternative imaginarium, you know, the world of social media, culture, media, schools, universities. We also need to forge alliances between all the subjects of emancipation, workers from all conditions, including freelancers and small and medium-sized businesses, which do not pertain to the traditional right context, but can move aside and join the world of emancipation. We also need to forge alliances with feminisms and focus on the care sector, gender violence, the environmentalist movement that needs to incorporate itself not only as a separate vector from the left, it has to be something that, you know, integrates into our society. Then also pacifists, LGBTI groups. I'm aware of the fact that we have something against us, which is the current epoch's common sense, but we have an advantage. And there's something we don't often count on, which it's the contradictions. There is unsolved contradictions of capitalism. Trump almost claimed his place, and I think Trump's position weakens extreme right worldwide. But now that we don't need to worry about Trump, we can start worrying about Biden. Bolivia, as I said, has won against all odds, and the European Union has changed its path for 3 reasons. Let us not be mistaken. First, because it has realized that the medicine of 2008 has not worked. Secondly, due to the pressure of southern countries, which have had more power of influence because the Brexit has helped in that direction. Also because austerity, you know, they've realized it's like oxygen for the growth of extreme right. And finally, because Germany and Central European countries know that with a broken Europe, they have no future before Russia, the States and China. And, you know, if there's no order under the stars, the situation is ideal for many things. And I think a lot of pain is inside our bodies. There's different layers, COVID, capitalism, and it is not as easy to identify the link between COVID-19 and pain, but I think the pain is very much there. The pandemics has created arguments in defense of the public sphere. I think that discourse is now more consistent, but for it to be awareness and public policies, we need to place Europe in a constituent process. We need to open up new and big social conversations. And why do I say that? Because neoliberal inertias of our countries are very, very strong, and they're inserted into people's consciousness. And I think that in the short term, the neoliberal consciousness will be very determined. We're subsidizing people, but do these subsidies generate confidence, or are we creating consumers? Or are we creating middle classes that now have this aspiration, will vote their murderers? I think that one of the big errors of the left during the 20th century was to think that, you know, the worse the situation is, the best it is for us. But no, from the worst, fascism could emerge. Walter Emergen talked about the emergency breaks of history, but improving the life of people within the parameters of neoliberalism, I'll say it again, improving the lives of people under neoliberal parameters, I think makes our social base more narrow. And I'll repeat what I mentioned before about Bolivia. Without adversaries, the left is only managing what exists. And it is for that that we need taxes on big fortunes. We need to talk about basic wages, active employment policies. We also need to talk about financial capitalism as a new way of fascism that creates destruction and death. And we need to also talk about care, because care affects half of the population, and any change in these areas, there are structural changes. Contradictions are written in capitalism, and they will only be productive if we create a story around them, and that leads to my conclusions. Postmodern history is wrong when it thinks that everything is a story. You know, it is not true. But the left that we want to represent, you know, if we want to continue being left, we cannot ignore the fact that if we lose the story, we also lose a big part of potential of transformation. And finally, I also think that we need to learn from the environmentalist movement, something they developed when they realized that the apocalyptic discourse only led to paralysis. That discourse that the end of the world was near only helped Al Gore, record 2 documentaries and to basically almost paralyze the possibility, because there is a saying in Spain that says, when I think that I'm going to die, I put my blanket on the floor and I go to sleep. And what have environmentalists done? They're beginning to talk about transition, environmentalist transition. And I think this is something we need to incorporate, because any relevant social change is preceded by a ample conversation. Jesus Ibáñez, my teacher, said that the preface of any revolution is always a great conversation. That's all on my part.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Juan.
I was unable to stop the Spanish temperament, so our coffee, I was about to have a coffee break for 10 minutes and go back because we have 3 speakers left. Let's make this coffee break 5 minutes now so we can have time. You don't have to leave the event, just turn off your mic and your camera. And let's see each other again in 5 minutes strictly, please. Okay, we are waiting for Maria. Okay, Maria is here. I think we can start again, right? Okay. I am now giving the floor to Anna Mikkola, Vice President of the European Left Party. She comes from Finland, from Left Alliance.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be speaking in English. Just let me get my notes up. Thank you for the very interesting interventions so far. I think my perspective in my presentation will be somewhat different. And one of the major reasons for that is that I represent the Left Alliance from Finland, which is currently in government, and we have the Ministry of Health. So we have been at the forefront of handling the corona crisis in the country. And the left in Finland is doing quite well at the moment. We are quite strong. One of the reasons being that it seems we have handled the pandemic quite well. And this is also, by quite well, I mean in terms of statistics. I think at the moment we are the country in Europe with the least amount of cases. But it's also in terms of popular opinion, because according to surveys, the people are really satisfied with how the pandemic has been handled. And especially this means that the leading coalition party, the Social Democratic Party, is more popular now than ever in Finland. It also means that our current right-wing opposition is in trouble, and mostly it means that our traditional conservative opposition is in trouble. The extreme right-wing, the anti-immigration right-wing, has held its ground, and they have maybe gained a little also on the expense of the traditional right, not the expense of the left. So in the opposition, we see this change, that the extreme right is gaining while the conservative traditional right is going down. But the left and Social Democratic coalition government is maintaining its popularity and gaining in popularity. So this is a very different situation to a lot of countries in Europe. And I think what the crisis has done in our country is it has exposed the welfare system and the welfare structures in a way that has not happened in decades. And the results has been that people have kind of found the welfare system again and the welfare structures again. They have realized again what these structures are. What do they do? How do they work for the people? And there's a kind of a rekindled appreciation for those structures. And I think that is a situation that we haven't been in, the left hasn't faced since like the 1990s. It's a completely new situation because the current discourse is not about privatization, it's not about neoliberalism. It's about welfare structures and what they can do for you and how we should change those structures in order for everybody to do better within or during this crisis. And that is a discourse that is very, very different in nature to what we've had before. And in some ways, it has made our political position, even easier than we could have imagined in the beginning of our current government. We've been able to implement measures that were unimaginable for the left, even in our current coalition before. We've been able to increase the amount of money given or support given to the poorest. We've been able to enhance the unemployment security system, etc., etc. So we've actually found ourselves in a rather interesting situation. Because at least in our country, what happened is when we were faced with closure of businesses, with unemployment, with loss of jobs, more and more people then started to be dependent on the welfare system and the various benefits, etc. And we were able to show that those systems can work for you. And for many, many reasons, the welfare system in Finland has so far been able to handle it and been able to hold the situation together. I understand that this might not be the situation in many other European countries, but at least here it has been our experience. And I think although of course not everything is perfect, many things have gone wrong. People have lost their jobs, etc., etc. So things are not all right, but looking at the positive sides, this is what I see as a positive thing. And I can see what I mean. It's a huge shift in mentality. Nobody is talking about privatizing anything at the moment, and that is one of the basic reasons why the conservative right is not doing so well at the moment. But I think I can see the same sort of development on EU level as well, when we are looking at what the EU has done. Now, we all know that the European Union's response has not been adequate. It's not enough. It's not been structured the way we would like it to be structured. So it's far from perfect. But there as well, I think we can see a change in mentality. Suddenly, national debt or debt in general is not a swear word. It's not something to avoid. We can actually be in debt and take care of this crisis. Now, that is a big shift. As was mentioned before, the growth and stability package has been put on hold. Of course, that's only on hold, as both Walter and Heinz mentioned in their presentations, but it's still on hold. So that is also a shift in mentality. I think this is what we are seeing at the moment, even when I read like Commission reports on the Green New Deal. Words like fairness have gained a new content, because previously when you saw fair stuff in those reports, they would use words like fair, but they didn't mean anything. But now it actually has some content. It's used in reference to a more equal distribution of income. It's used in reference to ensuring minimal or even universal income levels for people on a European. So suddenly in Europe, we are in a situation where we are realistically talking about a universal income, for instance. Of course, whatever universal income system might be implemented in the foreseeable future would not be perfect. It would not be enough. I acknowledge that. But at the same time, I can see that we are talking about it realistically. It's become a topic in high politics, which it definitely was not before. So I think that change is quite significant, and I think this is something that the left must take advantage of, if one can say something like that, because it is undeniable that the nature of the recovery packages now is very different to what the nature of dealing with the previous financial crisis, for instance, was. Now, this does not mean that everything is going to go well, or that everything is going to be fine and dandy. That's not what I mean. Those people and parties and politicians and economists and businesses who promote austerity measures are still, they still exist. They have just been a bit quiet recently, but they are very much there, and they are looking for ways to get their agenda back on the general agenda. So we have to be aware of that. Now, my basic fear is that because their agenda has now been put on hold and in the background, and they're losing in popularity to the extreme right wing, is what we're going to see when the austerity measures come back. We're going to possibly see them come back as the part of the extreme right's agenda, and the extreme right might well benefit from this situation in the slightly longer term. Now, the pressure is not going to be there at this moment, but I think if we start looking at 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, then I think we're going to be in big trouble. And at least over here, how I can see the discourse going is, now that we have accumulated so much national debt handling the crisis, then this bunch of people and politics parties will come on stage and start saying that this debt needs to be paid, the bill for the pandemic needs to be paid, and therefore we must have austerity measures, and we must basically throw all the foreigners out of our countries, etc. So this is the fear that I have at the moment. So what is the left to do in this situation? I don't think there's like a miracle potion that will help, and of course any recipe that we find will be very much according to our country. So I don't think there's a common European recipe at the moment for the left parties. At the moment, of course, for us in Finland, as long as we can continue handling the crisis so that our welfare structures hold and our health services, national and public healthcare services hold this crisis, and in that way we're basically able to provide people with a sense of security. I think we might come on top of this debate, and I think that's something that I think previous presentations touched upon as well, that at the moment in the population, at least what I'm seeing, is that there's a very, very strong need for safety, for security. And in the past, the whole discourse around security has been dominated by the right wing. It's been about, well, the military, obviously. It's been about increasing the number of police. It's been about crime. It's been, for the extreme right, it's been about immigration. And that's how the security discourse has revolved around those topics now. I think the left here has a chance of taking over the security discourse and pointing out that it has been the state, the welfare structures, the welfare state that has been providing the security in this crisis. It's not what the right wing has been talking about for decades. It's what the left has been doing and talking about for decades. And I think there's this sort of renewed appreciation of the state is a real chance for the European left to put its agenda somewhere where it actually resonates with a lot of people at the moment. So these things I offer to you as sort of positives, if we're trying to find positives, because the way I see it, for decades now, the European left has been looking at our own failures, and we're very good at analyzing those, and we're very good at analyzing what happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and how austerity measures made everything worse and stuff like that. We're very good at that, but we have to come up with a vision of the future and how we're going to organize these things. And we have to do it because what should be the center stage of any strategy we have is we have to win elections. We have to win elections in our countries in order to be in government, in order to shift politics to the left, and in that way eventually also to change the way of European integration. That's the only way. So we have to focus on winning elections, and that's why we need to find the messages that will resonate with people. So that's kind of my idea at the moment, is to tap into the security discourse. But of course that's a bit of an undeveloped idea that is just my own, and I'm just throwing it out there. But that's the way I see it. So at the moment, my analysis is that things are actually taking a positive turn for the left. We just need to be there to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Now I'm giving the floor to the next speaker, Giώργος Katrougalos. He comes from Greece. He's a professor of public law and an MP of SYRIZA.
Thank you very much, Angelina. And a lot of interesting things have been already heard. I'll try to skip issues that I agree with, and I'll start by referring to some data so as to have a full appraisal of the impact of the coronavirus, both on societal and on economic issues. For the first time in 30 years, we have now an increase of global poverty. According to the United Nations World Institute for Development, 500 million people, or 8% of the total human population, are now new poor. And we are speaking about extreme poverty, not relative poverty. According to the ILO, 2.7 billion workers were affected by partial or full lockdown measures. And the permanent impact of the crisis is estimated again by ILO as follows: 6.7% of the working hours globally are going to be lost. This is equivalent to 195 million full-time workers. It's self-evident that this evolution feeds the feelings of insecurity. Juan Carlos has spoken about how the narrative for security of the right is reinforced by these trends. And we should not limit the impact just at the level of the economy. Emergency powers to deal with the pandemic is now a rule in all Western democracies. And of course, it was necessary to take similar measures. The pandemic is a major public health emergency that makes some restraints on liberties inevitable, lockdown, for instance. But however, we should not limit the criticism to the libertarian right or to the alt-right, which overemphasizes the factor of state intervention and does not criticize what is, in my eyes, the most important thing: how to avoid mass surveillance permanent after the end of the crisis, a kind of panopticon societies that could use the reflexes of the COVID in order to create a permanent state of exception. But taking all that into account, the most striking effects of the crisis have been at the societal, the economic, and the institutional level, speaking about the welfare state structure. Now even the most fervent marketeers recognize the role of the state to face the pandemic. But one of the most serious problems that our democracies have to face is exactly the hollowing of health systems due to the disruption of neoliberal policies the last 40 years. To give you again some numbers, the most emblematic national health system of all, the British one, lost 44% of its general and acute beds between 1987 and 2019. What is more striking is that the cuts disproportionately affect the most deprived areas, the poorest and the decentralized areas of north of England. Even now, the 2020 budget is almost 1 billion euros lower than this in 2015. And almost 25% less, that is, from this level, which of course it was a level affected by the neoliberal policies of almost 2 decades before. And this is not limited, of course, to the United Kingdom. For instance, in Italy, public funding has decreased by about 37 billion euros during the same period. And most of these cuts, 27 billion euros, took place in the period from 2010 to 2015. Over the last decade, 359 hospitals have been closed. Especially acute beds have been decreased by 30%. Similar trends also in Greece. And here we see a difference on whether we have a progressive government or a conservative government in power. We have seen in the recent budget in Spain an increase of 155% of the money allocated to the public health. Whereas in Greece, the conservative government of New Democracy has actually decreased the budget for 2021 with respect to the previous year. The COVID has also a huge impact on deepening of inequalities. Redistribution of wealth and power, of course, it was following a trend during the last decades away from the working and the middle class. Most of the growth goes to the wealthiest, 1% of the population. But this has been fully exacerbated during the crisis. Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, has won in just one day $13 billion when the Amazon stocks rose by 8%. This is more than the annual budget of most middle-sized European states, like, for instance, North Macedonia. Now, Apple is more valuable than the entire FTSE 100, the British stock exchange companies. Its value is evaluated at $2.3 trillion compared to about $2 trillion, 1.5 trillion pounds of all the companies in this index. And more generally, the American digital firms now have more value than the total of all European companies that are presented in the European stock exchanges. The response of the European Union, as already has been explained by many speakers, Heinz and Walter more analytically, has been at the beginning spasmodic and ethnocentric. For instance, the closing of the borders did not respect the provisions of the Schengen Agreement. We did not have any effort of consultation among the member states, but just a unilateral decision of closing the frontiers. And at the beginning of March, Germany even blocked the export of protective medical equipment, the exact inverse of solidarity very much needed in similar situations. We have seen a partial reversal of this ethnocentric trend by the introduction of the Recovery Fund, which of course it is a positive evolution, exactly because it represents a first step towards mutualization of risk. However, it is a relatively timid step. 9 governments, among them France, Italy, Spain, have demanded also the issuing of Eurobonds in order to mutualize the cost of crisis management. In my eyes, the critical question is if these positive, although timid steps are going to have a follow-up after the end of the pandemics. Because now we have a freezing of the Stability Pact, but we may very much probably return to this straitjacket after the end of the emergency measures. And that would represent a serious challenge for especially the weaker economies, taking into account the impact of the emergency measures, both to public debt and to the deficit standards. Especially as haircut is not a probable scenario, I think that the efforts of the progressive forces should reorient themselves to the full re-examining of the Stability Pact criteria. But what would constitute not a defensive, but let's say a more aggressive stance with left characteristics? Heinz, Walter has described a new Green Deal plus democracy plus equality measures. I think that we should work closer together with the civil society and the trade unions, trying to exploit rights already in force and interpret them as putting a non-regression clause, at least, to the ante-pandemic situation. For instance, workers' rights to information, consultation, and participation, stemming already from European and national law, should be enforced and complied with. What in all decisions concerning restructuring of enterprises, of working hours, working conditions, and as already progressive governments have done, sufficient social allocation should be available to more vulnerable. However, the measures should not be just economic. It is imperative to reverse this trend of inequalities and of, let's say, immunity of multinationals from taxation. Besides the proposals of the European Parliament, there is now an ongoing discussion on OECD regarding the digital taxation and the minimum corporate taxation towards a more, let's say, global regime of tax fairness. It is interesting that exactly because this fiscal immunity of multinationals, especially digital multinationals, represents a heavy blow to the possibilities of national states to finance their economy and their welfare state, there is a trend towards consensual acceptance of at least minimal solutions in this field, with the exception, of course, of the reaction of the American administration to these proposals. One should hope that under the new Biden administration, we should see some kind of shift in this direction. I think that as progressive forces, we should also push for some institutional and normative measures. For instance, we should link the ongoing discussion for the accession of the European Union to the European Convention of Human Rights, to its accession also to the European Social Charter. The European Committee of Social Rights, the organ supervising the European Social Charter, was very probably the only European institution that was critical to the austerity measures. For instance, regarding Greece, it has issued a number of decisions that judged as contrary to the European Social Charter measures of the so-called memoranda of the austerity programs imposed to Greece, both at the level of labor legislation, especially sub-minimum wage for the young, that allowed the Greek state to determine regulation for less money to young people under 25, even if they were doing the same job as more elderly people, and also regarding the cuts of pensions. But what is more important, it is a political answer. We need a new political distribution of power. And that requires, as again has been mentioned by other colleagues and comrades, a progressive force, a progressive front comprising, of course, the forces of the left, but also the forces of the Social Democrats that reject neoliberalism, and of course, the forces of ecology. Again, I think the experiment of Spain gives us a kind of model of this alliance, together with similar trends that have been developed also in the past in Portugal. It is not easy, exactly because we have a very compact opponent front against us, and also decades of neoliberalism that have created institutional status quo at the European Union. But I don't think there is any other way out of the crisis. And of course, this presupposes also the mass movement of trade unions, of civil society. It is not possible to have such a progressive political front if we do not have previously a social front at the national level, of course, but also at the European level, exactly because the challenges we are facing are not anymore national, but global, and they could not be faced without an effort of coordination, at least at the European level. I think I have exhausted my time, so I'm ending here. I think it was a very interesting discussion so far, and I hope that we are going to have the chance, even during the Q&As, to shed some light on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgos. Thank you. Now we're proceeding to Maria Karamesini, who is the last speaker. And please, I'm calling you to put your questions in this Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. It is the icon with the double bubble. So we can have some questions, but not so many, because we have already exceeded the time of the session. Maria, please.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm the last speaker. I don't know if it's a privilege. I'm not sure, but I'll make my best. I'll do my best. After so many things, very interesting things that have been heard, especially from politicians. Not only, of course, but many politicians here have taken the floor, and I'm an academic, but politically involved in SYRIZA and Nikos Poulantzas Institute. I will I will share my screen because I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which will facilitate the people who are listening and looking at this event. And I'll start by saying that I don't know how I can move. I have no possibility to. Okay. I will start by saying that the challenges for the radical left in a pandemic world depend on the nature of the crisis and its relationship with the underlying contradictions of the neoliberal regime of global financialized capitalism. The pandemic crisis, as we all know, is unprecedented in nature and character. It's a triple crisis of capitalism. It's a health crisis related with the ecological crisis. And it is an unorthodox economic crisis, mixing a supply, a demand, and a financial crisis. With major social consequences. At the same time, is a deep global recession on a scale not witnessed since the 1930s. The pandemic crisis is not a brief recessionary episode caused by a temporary shock. And with the second wave of the pandemic, this crisis is deepening and it is establishing itself as the second major crisis of global neoliberal financialized capitalism, since it has blended with the unresolved structural causes and problems created by the 2008 crisis. And I enumerate the problems. These problems and causes were the continuing wage repression and growing income inequalities, which caused inadequate demand in all developing and developed countries. The continuing weak productive investment, which was related with the financial speculation and creation of bubbles. This continuing weak productive investment was also eased, and the financial speculation was also eased by the policy of the European Central Bank. The quantitative easing went to banks that speculated in stock markets and created bubbles. Third cause and problem, it is the massive rise between 2013 and 2019 in leveraged corporate loans and the still huge private household debt inherited by the 2008 crisis. Another problem is the degradation of public infrastructure in all fields. We have seen during the US elections in what state the public infrastructure in the US was in, but also this is also the case in Germany, in all countries that have followed continuing austerity policies, including the degradation of infrastructure and privatization in the healthcare sector. The still unregulated shadow banking system. There has been a regulation of the banking system, but no regulation at all of the shadow banking system, hedge and equity funds, and tax havens. So the speculation in the global financial markets has continued unabated after the 2012 to 13. Last but not least, there has been a lack of any effort to establish a new international order replacing the neoliberal hyper-globalization, which has led to protectionism and economic wars, especially between the US and China, but not only. This means that the European left needs to integrate the original elements and claims stemming from the experience of the pandemic to update its political project against neoliberalism. Now, the pandemic is also the greatest crisis the EU has ever experienced in its history. There has been a quick reaction this time by European institutions by taking emergency measures. The quick reaction was especially by the ECB. This was not the case in the 2008 crisis. It's a novel element which was very, very important to enable state banks and companies to borrow from financial markets at low costs. At the same time, we have the suspension of the fiscal rules of the Stability and Growth Pact and EU competition law by allowing state aids to save sectors and companies. This situation, in spite of measures taken at the national level, we can see from projections and forecasts that there is going to be a new divergence of the southern countries, as in the 2008 crisis, which endangers the unity and the convergence of the EU in the four countries which are most in the worst situation: Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Greece. Now we have added France and Belgium. So there is a larger now number of countries, and Croatia, a larger number of countries that are now diverging from the other countries, from the EU average. So there is a combination of the divergence from the 2008 crisis with the pandemic crisis, which is a real risk for the European integration project. These emergency measures have allowed all EU member states to implement large fiscal and financial packages, which are unparalleled with the 2008 crisis. An estimate by the Bruegel Institute has said that we have 10 times more state intervention than in the 2008 crisis, which is a substantial difference between the two crises. Among the measures, I will insist and focus on the job protection measures, which are of great interest for the left. And I have to say that the job retention measures have been generalized. They were present in the previous crisis, but they have been generalized in all EU member states during this crisis. And they have succeeded during this crisis because of their extensive use to keep open unemployment under control. This we have to take into account. The EU average, in the EU on average, unemployment has passed from 6.2 to 7.1% from February to August. So we don't expect, we expect a slight rise, but that would not surpass the 4 percentage 0.4 percentage points. So they have succeeded in keeping open unemployment under control, but there has been an unprecedented phenomenon during this crisis, never before seen in previous crises, not only the 2008, but the previous also. We have a spectacular rise in hidden unemployment everywhere, not only in Europe, in all parts of the world. In Europe, the inactivity rate rose in just 2 quarters from 26.5% to 28.2%, slightly more for men than for women. We have 1.5 million more unemployed people because of the pandemic, and we have 5 million more inactive people. Never seen before, unique historical phenomenon during the past 50 years, all over, okay, in the history of crisis. At the same time, we have a great reduction in wages in many countries, especially for temporary layoffs. We have focused very much on what has been done for short-time working schemes, but the majority of people were under temporary layoff schemes. In Greece, we had 40% of people under temporary layoffs, but in all other countries, many countries, a very substantial part of the workers or employees were under these schemes. And also the novel phenomenon was the rise in teleworking, which is compared, a historian says that it is the first time after the Industrial Revolution that we have so many people working from home. 31% of employed women, 37% of men started teleworking during the Great Lockdown in the EU. And we have positive aspects as reported by the workers in surveys by Eurofound, but many negative aspects, especially social distance, social isolation, and other work-life balance problems, etc. At the same time, another novel phenomenon during this crisis is that 19 EU member states introduced for the first time income protection measures covering the self-employed and freelancers, and many other member states covered also other unprotected non-standard workers, such as permanent seasonal workers or artists, etc. But nevertheless, the pandemic has deepened inequalities, and the vulnerable groups of workers and families have been the greatest victims of the crisis. The crisis has taken a heavier toll on women on all fronts. Domestic violence, unpaid care work, work-life balance problems, greater exposure to the virus in essential occupation, greater contraction of employment than men, etc. Also, migrant workers, young people, temporary and part-time and low-paid employees, the solo self-employed, platform and informal workers have also suffered more from job loss and lack of income support. Now, I come to what has been commented by previous speakers to the next generation EU and the recovery, and in particular the recovery and resilience facility. I share the point that it is it represents a remarkable the adoption of the next generation EU and the recovery fund represents a remarkable shift in EU economic and budgetary policy. Of course, it was not it was imposed by the threat that Italy might leave the Eurozone. It is the risk of the second Eurozone crisis and disintegration that has pushed the balance of forces in favor of the adoption of this recovery and resilience facility. It is, but I also share the previous speakers that say that it is an important but limited step of solidarity and towards socio-ecological transformation. A positive side, we know everybody that it's the common EU borrowing, the introduction for the first time of European taxes to repay part of the debt, the redistribution in favor of much redistribution in favor of southern countries in the form of grants. But however, it's very small in size. It provides sufficient funding for the needs of recovery and no funding at all for relief measures from the second wave of the pandemic that is changing the situation, the whole situation, and funding needs of the EU member states. So the great proportion consists of loans, and grants and loans are linked to the European semester and structural reforms. What I had prepared, and I fully share the view that has expressed by many speakers in this workshop, is that the dealing with the debt, public and private, will be the main class battle of the coming years. And we should focus our proposals as a left, the European left, on these two particular problems. Okay, you've seen the figure, the countries that have the highest general government gross debt as a proportion of GDP. I think it's these figures are easily accessible. I won't speak about the figures, but I think that the public debt and the private debt problem is a common problem in all EU member states, because even the countries that have a low sovereign debt problem, they have a high private debt problem. So the debt is public or private will be the main struggle, and the class struggle and class battle of the coming years, and we should be present. Now, I come to the risk and challenges ahead for the European left. We should avoid the repetition of 2010, the turn to austerity. It would be a disaster. It would be a defeat for not only for the left, but for all progressive forces in Europe. And we should also stop the continuing privatization of welfare states. We may have some changes in macroeconomic policy, but the neoliberal project is still continuing under the pandemic. And now I'll come to the immediate challenges, and I will enumerate very quickly. We should prevent the immediate challenges, prevent the second wave of the pandemic from increasing unemployment, because now there is a risk of passing from hidden unemployment to open unemployment because of the closure of firms that cannot survive anymore under the second wave of the pandemic. And there is a risk of open unemployment and impoverishment. So we must extend and improve retention schemes. In many countries, they don't offer sufficient protection. By implementing also public work schemes, having job guarantees, measures for job guarantees. We should resolve the huge problem of the private debt for household and small enterprises, because the second wave of the pandemic also exacerbates the problem of outstanding and unpaid loans. And so we have to look for partial cancellation of works together in conjunction with this restructuring of the banking system. We should think about what a banking system should look like, and what the new map of the banking regulation should be at the European level. Then we should regulate teleworking to reconcile it with the needs of workers and their participation to unions and collective action, and to prevent social isolation and individualization of industrial relation. Teleworking is a big threat for the individualization of industrial relations. We should struggle against inward poverty and undervaluation of essential jobs, support the proposal for the directive on minimum wages, and support the struggle for the increase in the relative pay of workers in essential services. And now I finish with the medium-term challenges. We should push for a permanent revision of the fiscal rules of the Stability and Growth Pact, while supporting, in the meantime, any relaxation of such rules. For example, there have been proposals by the European Fiscal Board. They are not very bold, but they are a starting point. And I think that is a new way of thinking at the European level, even at this high level of consultancy, for the relaxation of the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. So we should make concrete proposals for the restructuring of sovereign debts in the EU. We should take into account that currently the ECB holds 20% of the debt of sovereign debts, and we should focus on the partial cancellation or mutualization of the debts. granting the ECB a central role as a lender of last resort, directly or indirectly, with or without having to change the European treaties. There are subtle ways in using the ECB for the structuring of debt and the mutualization without having to pass from the change of the European treaties. Last but not least, we should recognize the value of care for social reproduction and the importance of investing in the welfare state to prepare both against the current and future health crisis, and also to tackle the growing care deficit in our aging societies. We should ensure that the national recovery plans include not only public investments destined to green the economy, but also social investments in the health and social care sectors, opening the way for a care economy, which is based on the citizenship right to care and to be cared, and the equal sharing of unpaid care work between women and men. We need to invest in the care economy, which improves social welfare and social and gender equality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you all. If anybody wants, it is now the time to put your question in this Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We can take 3 or 4 questions, I guess, and then we need to finish this session. I want to give the floor actually to Connie, because she wanted to pose a question, but since she's a panelist, she's not able to type a question in the Q&A box. So I will give her the floor.
Many thanks.
Yes.
Excuse me, please. Many thanks for your contribution, and especially the last one was really helpful, better to understand the different problems what we have on the table. I have a lot of questions, but I have to reduce my question to maybe 2. My first question is the question of security, the term. Is it possible to mobilize with the term of security also from the left-hand side? Also, Juan Carlos spoke about this topic, and also Anna Mikkola spoke about the possibility and the change to mobilize it. But that would be mean the reinterpretation of the topic of security. Is it possible to take this topic and to mobilize? That is a question of my point. The second question is a question to the limit of capitalism. Of course, that's a fundamental question on the table. And what should be the alternative to this topic? And Walter spoke in the speech about the alternative of socialism. Under the condition what we have, is the question for me in which direction we can go more precisely when we want to have or when we want to realize a kind of alternative society. What should be the next steps? And maybe we have to discuss it in the kind of entry project or keystones on the way. Maybe you can give me more keystones for the way to understand what does it mean concretely. Many thanks.
I will read out another question so you can have all them together. It is from a comrade that comes from Denmark. The Danish Social Democratic minority government has just put forward a new bill on epidemics with draconian measures of surveillance, including transferring extreme powers to the Minister of Health. There is a very critical debate going on here concerning this bill. What are the experiences of other European Union countries concerning this kind of legislations? How will you explain the reasons for such kind of legislation? They don't seem to be concerned only about health. And then there is another question regarding the reduction of working hours in relation with the social reproductive work. So the conclusion is mostly about women. The theory, the vision of Marx Engels was that the industrial development must make it possible to reduce the working hours so that as a whole and for the development of society, we can have more time, people can have more time for themselves and for self-awareness, for the development of the cultural world and our human powers, but organized in capitalist terms, the economy of time, as Marx calls it, leads to a deepening of the division in society. There is no time for human development. There is only this economy of time, and this is used in order to increase profit. Everything that cannot be accelerated or rationalized and create more profit is put it aside. Actually, women are the ones who do all the reproductive work. So this is an observation that actually wants your perspective and your views upon that, and how we stand towards this. I will give you now some time. Who wants to take the floor first and react? Anybody? Okay, Anna, you were quick, so. And then Giorgos, okay.
Okay, thanks. I'd just like to quickly respond to what Cornelia was asking about regarding the security and taking over the security discourse. I think in this particular question, we have a problem with the English language because the word security and the whole political conversation around security in English is a very militaristic. It's a very sort of masculine, macho word in English because there are certain political historical roots that it comes from, and especially in the sort of Anglo-American political context, it has often been about external policies and security policies and so forth. And so when I start to think about this, and especially through my own mother tongue, the whole concept of security is also very much linked with the concept of protection. And I think those are very kind of different things in English, security and protection. So what we are looking at here is kind of the whole discourse around protecting the people. And what we've seen in different COVID responses, we can take the United Kingdom, for instance, where the initial response was to protect the companies and the businesses and maybe jobs through that, but anyway, on the expense of public health. Whereas in the Nordic states, for instance, the first response was to protect people from the actual disease, was to focus on the public health response and protect the people, protect their health. So in that sense, I think the whole discourse around security and protection is something that we can take over as long as we all know what we're talking about. So what I'm trying to talk about is that the welfare state, universal income, public services, etc., they protect people from pandemics like COVID, but also other sorts of crises that we face in a global world. So in the sense, I understand what you're trying to ask, and I don't like the word security in English either. I don't think it works as well as it should. And of course, this will be different in all countries and how these terms are used. But I hope I kind of managed to bring forward the idea here.
Okay, following on what already Anna said, with which I concur, it is evident that we have two antithetic, two antagonistic discourses of the right and of the left regarding the term security. For the right, all issues of right, it is above all a message centered around the law and order. And it is a message that can be appealing even to working class and to middle class strata, especially in neighborhoods where the degradation of welfare state has reached proportions that we have not seen before the last decades. On the other hand, not just for us, let's say the left, also for the Social Democrats, security was not synonymous with this message of law and order. I remind you, for instance, the famous speech of Roosevelt in 1941, in which he spoke about the four freedoms, one of which was freedom from want. What we're saying as a left, the necessary possibility for everybody to satisfy his own needs. And the fourth freedom was exactly the freedom from fear. What we are saying in, let's say, contemporary world of social science, social security. I think, therefore, that we must be very cautious in how we articulate our discourse. I don't think we should be always antithetic to the message of, let's say, of the necessity to have also security at the level of the police, as it is not a good idea to deliver this kind of security to the right. And we must differentiate exactly the necessity of feeling safe in our neighborhoods from bigotry, from xenophobia, from Islamophobia. But above all, we should promote the positive message that security is not just a negative notion. Security is also a positive one. All this related with the welfare state. And I think this is also an answer to another question posed. I have tried also to refer to that, other speakers as well. How we are going to stand for limitations of our freedom. For instance, this extension of survey, use of digital new technology in order to trace COVID symptoms. And again, it is difficult to differentiate our criticism for the, let's say, the alt-right or the libertarian right criticism, which poses under question even the ability of the state to proceed to such measures. In my understanding, we should clearly differentiate these kind of measures as exceptional measures that should not be continue to be implemented after the pandemic. And we should also put weight on the argument that this should not only be defined by the executive power. They should have been under parliamentary discussion and to the extent of possible involve also civil society and independent administrative authorities. In a nutshell, I think that we must send a clear message that we are quite opposite to any kind of zero tolerance law and order message, without ignoring, of course, the very realistic fear of our populations that some measures should be taken.
Thank you, Giorgos. I think Heinz has asked for the floor. Any woman? I want to give the floor to a woman. Okay, First Maria and then Heinz.
Thank you. I would like to respond to the question made by, I don't remember the name, but the woman that asked for the reduction of working hours. And
Heidi.
Where is, okay, I can't see her. It's on in the chat, perhaps, yes. She asked about the relationship of the reduction of working hours with reproductive work. And I would say that for many years, the left said that by reducing working hours, we would expect that there would be an equal sharing of unpaid work and care work between women and men. The feminist movement has rejected this very simplistic argument, and the feminist movement has argued in favor of both reducing working hours and putting forward the claim for sharing, equal sharing of unpaid care work, unpaid housework between women and men. So there is no one way from reducing. There is no causal relationship between the two. Now, as regards the claim for reducing working hours as a way of emancipation of workers from the obligation to be in paid work for many hours at the expense of their free development of their time and their outside work. I would say that when we put forward our claims, in principle, this is it's good. It's right. I think that in all our agendas, we have this claim for reducing working time in order to have more free time and develop ourselves outside work, etc., and cope with other needs we have outside work. But to frame this as a particular claim, we should choose the moment, the right moment. For example, in this pandemic, I will give a figure. In June or July, 25% of the total labor force in the European Union was temporarily laid off. The employees, 25% of the employees were temporarily laid off. 7% were unemployed, and a little more than 6-7% were hidden unemployed. So we had a huge problem of people not having work at all. I'm not sure, and thousands of small and medium enterprises at the brink of collapse. I'm not sure that putting forward this claim during this pandemic at this very right moment would be the best thing, or would be a reasonable claim in these times. I think that we should think about how to have more jobs, to have income protection for people who have lost their jobs, who are not unemployed but underemployed, because, for example, in many job retention schemes, people and employees lose their income. In the Greek left, we have called for a full compensation of workers that are underemployed. So I think that the priority in these times of the pandemic is to fully compensate people who are underemployed, to better protect people who are unemployed, and to promote measures in order to give more jobs to people that are hidden or openly unemployed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Heinz? Ava, and then Walter.
Thanks. You hear me? Yeah. Okay. I also want to refer to the question of the reduction of working time, and because the main problem I see in this regard is the wage compensation. That's a problem, because we are now facing a reduction of working time, but without wage compensation. That's a problem. And I think that Maria is right to ask if is this the right moment? Is this to demand a reduction of working hours? We have this discussion. For example, in Germany, we have a discussion about the 4-day week. It was demanded also by the trade union IG Metall and also by the left. And the problem is that given the circumstances, the conditions of pandemic, we are facing a very defensive concept of reduction of working time without wage compensation. And therefore, we have to fight for an offensive concept of working reduction. That means also wage compensation, but it's a still ongoing, very interesting discussion about the working time. But I would like to stress that the main problem is the wage compensation, and we need that not only because of social aspects, because also in the interest of economic development, because we need that domestic demand by high wages and so on, and therefore we need a pay rise and a working reduction with wage compensation. But this is really a very big challenge.
Thank you, Heinz. This is a very interesting debate. Walter? And then, of course, yes, Catarina.
One word about security. In German, the notion of security, Sicherheit, also goes together with social security, soziale Sicherheit. So there is a positive connotation, and it would also make sense in German to speak on ecological security. However, there is a problem connected with this, namely that one of the biggest threats to security is security policy, meaning we cannot simply say or bypass the question by saying, well, security is about ecology, is about social security, and not talking about that, what's going on the level of international and militaristic policy. And as a matter of fact, one of the most concrete projects which is on the tabled by the main powers of the European Union, is to do away the principle of unanimity in the European Council when it comes to foreign and security policies. And I would say that the left cannot accept this principle for many reasons, but one of the reasons is because there is no parliamentary control and no parliamentary reservation, neither on the level of the national states, nor will it be on the European level, given the limits of power of the European Parliament. And that leads me to the core of my argument. I mean, without being too abstract, I believe that the core of the European problem is democracy. Why? Can we say that the nation states, even the big ones like Germany and France, will be able to cope with the big challenge of digitalization, of the environmental crisis? Will they be able to cope, for example, with the situation that Europe becomes more and more the theater of the economic and trade war between the US and China? But if we do not think that these problems can be addressed properly on the national level, then the question is, how could they be addressed on the European level? What are we talking about when speaking on Europe? We are talking about a system which disposes not more than one 0.1% of the accumulated gross national products of Europe. And I share Catarina's view that the performance of the EU, although structurally and institutionally, these sort of Eurobonds were steps forward and providing non-repayable funds to the southern countries of the European Union are steps forward. But all in all, it was disappointing. And that's no wonder, because if you have only 1.1% of the gross national product at your disposal, which reflects perfectly the neoliberal philosophy of the European constructions, then you only can disappoint systematically. And I believe that this is the source of growing and enhanced nationalism on Europe. So what is the answer? And I believe we must address this question in our discussions ahead. That unless the European Union becomes a space of democracy, meaning that the decision-taking is shifted from the intergovernmental structures and from the bureaucracies to parliament, unless this takes place, there will be no legitimacy to create sufficiently efficient instruments of addressing the crisis. And I understand Maria's argument on the reduction of the working time is absolutely correct. You have to be timely with your demands, and you have to strategize in space and in time. But we are talking now about a long-term strategy as the basis of the identity of the party to which we belong. And I believe that the European Left Party must become the party of European democracy and must acquire all the rights which political parties should have in a democratic space.
Thank you, Walter. I now have Catarina, and I guess that also Juan Carlos would like to react. Am I right? But I have another question, so let me just read it quickly so you can take also this into consideration. It seems that the state of emergency has been an excuse for worsening the labor relations and the working conditions of the working people around Europe. We also know that from theory that the neoliberals are seeking pretexts to extend for various reasons this state of emergencies in order to justify the leaking of resources from the bottom to the top. In terms of organizing the opposition, is there any coordination in European level? In terms of the alternative, are you currently working for a cohesive alternative to stop the institutionalization of capitalism, given the fact that the necessity of the public healthcare system is recognized now even by the neoliberals? Catarina. Your mic. Why cannot listen? There is a problem. Some people cannot listen to Catarina. And the interpreters also say that they cannot listen to you, Catarina. It seems that some of the panelists can listen to her. Okay, if the majority doesn't face a problem, then okay, go on.
we do with the time that we work. The problem of universal basic income. And because we are debating, I think I should say that I have a different approach to what I've heard today. Of course, in Portugal, we are proposing and we are fighting for a social income guarantee to all workers that have lost their income. Doesn't matter if they are formal, informal, national, migrants, whatever the income of their family. We want to support each worker to be above poverty level. And we are fighting for it. And so maybe our differences are not as huge as they can seem when we just use the word and the universal basic income. But I am very scared of the idea that the universal basic income can be used by the liberals for two things, or three, if you want to. In a feminist perspective, there's a third problem also. The first one is that if we don't have any structural change in our system, we don't have money to pay universal basic income and to pay a public healthcare system. And so maybe the liberals that are talking about universal basic income, they want to change one thing for the other. And they want people to accept universal basic income now in a crisis where people do need it. And then they will cut in healthcare, they will cut in schools, they will cut in all social welfare. And that is a problem for the left, because people will be worse, inequalities will rise. The other thing is that when technology would be a means so that people would work few hours, universal basic income can be a mean to stop it and make some of us work lots and lots of other hours and have lots of people that are unemployed and have some kind of support. And that is also a problem that divides workers. And then instead of being a way to make wages and make more freedom for workers, it will be instead a way of feeding millions of unemployed, while the one that work long hours for low wages also. That's a problem. And there's a third problem, the feminist issue, that is putting women back home. You have an universal basic income, and either you work long hours or you stay with it at home. And you don't have social equipments, and you don't have reproductive work that is from both gender responsibility. There are still women with no social equipments, with no social support, alone at home, but they have the universal basic income. And I'm saying this because if you want to build another answer from the crisis, we must be aware of the perils and dangers ahead. And I do believe that the liberals sometimes seem to be saying something that is similar to what we are saying, but it's not. And I believe that one of these thin lines, very worrying for us, is this idea of universal basic income. And that is why I do believe that the left, of course, it has to struggle for social support for everyone. And so, as I was saying in the beginning, we are fighting for it, of course. We need to address the issue of jobs and maintaining employment. And one of the things that strikes me as terrible is that the public support to the business and the European support to the economy does not have the one condition that the left has to reclaim: keep all jobs, keep all jobs, keep the level of employment. You have public support, European support, because you cannot work during the crisis, but you have to keep every job. You have to keep the level of employment. I believe that the left should not quit fighting for jobs. We should not be only fighting to help people that have lost jobs and that are unemployed. We cannot quit fighting for every job, fighting for employment, because I believe that is one of the ways to get out of this crisis in a different way that happened during the financial crisis. So I think this is it. We have allies, we have people in the street that are fighting, and we have an enemy, that's financial system and is capitalism. So we need to have a project, and the project needs to be safety. And safety is tackling climate change. Safety is public services and public welfare systems. And safety is jobs with rights and with proper wages. Thank you.
Thank you, Catarina. Maria was excited about this last point. Juan Carlos, yes.
Thank you. It is super interesting debate. I just want to say 4 things really briefly. Dedrich in the 30s talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: unemployment, misery, disease, the lack of homes. I think we have 4 horsemen of the apocalypse now that are more hidden, but because of that, they're more dangerous. The teacher that I mentioned earlier on, Jesus Ibanez, when he was teaching us meat in class, and he was referring to that quote of his, God has died, Hoss has died, he would also say, be careful, because God is more dangerous when he's dead than when he's alive, because when he's alive, at least you can see him coming. I think that we have 4 horsemen. The first is frustration, because it is the boiling pot for the extreme right. The first is frustration. There are many promises that are made and they're not satisfied, and that generates a lot of frustrated people, and those frustrated people are going to listen to the melodies of the extreme right. The second that is very linked to that is fear. Constant fear. In Spain, I often see how the media is building a discourse based on fear all the time. The third is noise. There is this huge noise that has one objective, saying that everyone is the same. I think the right has difficulties in all our countries when it comes to making the left voter vote right, and they know that. And so what they do is, because they cannot make the left voter vote right, they try the left voter to reach abstention, not vote, or become fragmented. Like those are the 2 main strategies. They will try to make the most of our fragmentation so that we become irrelevant, and they're also going to try to throw us to the realm of abstention, and that leads to the 4 horsemen of apocalypse, which is resignation. At the end, people who are frustrated, fearful, who are just, surrounded by noise, that is the best melting point for a point of no progress. This is very linked to what Catarina was mentioning. I think, the difference between safety and security, those terms. When you are insured, you're given security versus someone, but when you're taken care of, you're not being taken care of against anyone. So I think that we might be throwing stones on our own roofs. There's been sectors in the left who've, in order to distance themselves from Podemos, they have tried to use the discourse of security, and they have tried to use that a left-related discourse. But using the patriotic discourse is also another danger, because that is a realm that is characteristic of the right. I think we need to rebuild ourselves, reconfigure ourselves, but that will require redenomination, I think. I think it's going to be very difficult to incorporate with our own words, ideas that we can use from a liberating notion. In Spain, we say that the nation is what takes care of you. It is our way of using the word patria, or, you know, nation in Spain, a word that the right is using all the time. The second very brief message I wanted to convey is that this basic universal wage is not exclusive. It cannot be, you know, we cannot, you know, create a clash between the universal right and the right to employment, because the basic right does not generate, you know, recognition and the self-esteem as the right to, as the right to employment do. So I think we both need to go hand in hand. And as Catarina was saying earlier on, the neoliberal trap, you know, Milton Friedman was in favor of a basic universal income. You know, it has two traps. You know, wages go down. We all pay for a part of those wages, as it's happening now with temporary unemployment, the ERTES in Spain, that's the way they're called. And then, you know, they might be the great excuse to dismantle the welfare state, and consequently, we don't need to focus on this in a fragmented manner. There is an element that reclaims a very deep reflection. You know that the Bible says that, you know, the God in the Old Testament, who was very right-wing, basically, when he was trying to end with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two, you know, most exciting cities of the antiquity, the most fun, I would say. It'd be great if the next Transform meeting took place in Sodoma or Gomorrah when we can meet again, because I'm sure those cities were a lot of fun. But God decided to save Lot and, you know, his family, and the woman, the wife of Lot. Poor woman does not even have a name. She was the wife of Lot, and she looked back and became a salt statue. And Marx used to say, "Ooh, beware of looking back from a work perspective, because we can become salt statues." Hence, there are very many jobs that are really hard to recover, really hard. So we might need to take a step ahead and see which is a technological advance that is ahead of us instead of looking back. But I think that if our approach is to defend sectors that are going to be demolished due to technological progress, I think we're going to be a bit behind. And the same applies when we create a clash between polluting sectors and environmental reivindications. We find a clash there that we need to see coming, to avoid solutions coming from non-emancipating spaces and sectors. And then thirdly, I think it is really important to pay attention to everything that's linked to technological progress, to everything that is associated with vigilance, big data, with neuroscience, with the elements in which capitalism is currently exerting its exploitation mechanisms. They're new places, and I think that they're miles ahead of us in that race, in those areas. So I think we need to think about how those sectors are going to affect democracy, because one of the risks of COVID-19 is that some things that people thought impossible are already here. I thought there was a lot of naivety, a lot of candor in, a lot of childishness even, in the thought that what was being done in China would not be done in Europe, because that is giving human rights a bigger status than the metabolic need of capital. And that is the fight that we have nowadays on the table. That's why I previously said that the only way to fight the metabolism of capitalism is to open up debates and conversations, because remote work, telework, is going to demolish a lot of our freedoms and advances in the world sector. Vigilance through our phones, say, we're becoming our own guardians, our temperatures are being taken. That capitalism of vigilance is already here. It's in Europe. And of course, the big argument is, in the 40s, they used to say you have to work more to fight against the Soviets. Now, then they said you need to work more to fight against the Japanese. Then they said you have to work more to fight against the Chinese. And now we have to work more to fight against the robots. And then at the end of the day, we're fucked because it's impossible. So I just want to alert around the need to incorporate in our conversations that whole subject of scientific and technological advance, because I think it is through that the neoliberalist ideas are being leaked. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Thank you all. We have already exceeded our time. Thank you so much, Giorgos, Heinz, Catarina, Maria, Walter, Anna, Juan Carlos, and thank you all for attending. Now we have 50 minutes break in order to go to the second session, but this will be shorter. It will last 2 hours. The second session is actually a round table. It will be moderated by Haris Golemis. The title is Optimism of the Will, the famous Gramsci's quote, Building Hope for and by the Left. You can do what you did actually in the coffee break, just switch off your mics and the sound. You don't have to leave the event. It would be easier for you and also for the interpreters. And we come back in 50 minutes for the second session. Thank you all so much. It was a very interesting debate, and I hope you'll be in the second session as well.